Welcome back to the Extra Rep Podcast, guys. I'm Josh.
I'm Liam.
So today, what we're going to do is we're going to do a Q&A. So if you guys are on our Instagram, you would have seen we put up a question box, and we actually got a fair few questions on a variety of different things, training, nutrition, etc. So we thought we're going to go through a few of these. We're going to get to the bottom of it, and obviously try and explain it as, clearly and concisely as we can. Obviously, there'll be some context involved here. So the first question, Liam, I'm just having a look now.
Just to reiterate, I don't know any of these questions. We haven't looked at them. I haven't looked at them beforehand. Josh obviously has because they came through to him. I only had one from one of my clients, but we'll get to that later.
Sweet. So are explosive movements needed in a program?
Define explosive.
So I guess when people are talking about explosive, they're probably talking about those sort of athletic movements where you're moving weight really fast.
Gotcha. It depends on the person and what they're trying to achieve. Like if there's a specific sport like sprinting or something that actually works on explosive power, then I'd say, yes, it does need to be a part of someone's program.
What if someone was doing like a more hybrid style of training where it's like, yes, they're doing weights, but they're also doing cardio? Would you then say it's like more essential, or would you just say it's just more person dependent? It really depends on
I'd
your
send
goals.
them to a CrossFit gym. But nah, jokes aside. Look, it really does become person dependent. Like explosive movements, the one thing that you risk with explosive movement is high central nervous system fatigue. That's one thing. Like a lot of people do, a 1 rep, 3 rep deadlift. It's like there is a lot of strain going on there. It's like, it's an explosive movement, right? But the risk of injury is also high there. So it's like, do you really need to be doing it? If you're competing for strongman, then yes, it does need to be in your program. If you just want to look the best that you want to look, then I would say no, it doesn't necessarily need to be in your program.
Yeah, I think it depends. Again, you can have periods of doing like compound movements explosively at, maybe 70% of your 1 rep max or something, and focusing on, speed and velocity and those sort of things. And look, could that carry over to running and athletic stuff? Of course it potentially could. But yeah, I think like I said, it is a person dependent task. Of course, you can add this sort of stuff in if you want to just run faster, like I said, a bit more of that hybrid training. Could definitely have a use in a program. But again, this is going to be person and phase dependent as well, I think is a good way to put it. Depends on the person, but can definitely be useful. But if you're just looking to build as much muscle as possible, probably not.
I always go back to people, it's like, what are you doing it for? Like really think about it, because it still shocks me to this day, like a lot of people's programming, they don't actually know why they're doing certain exercises. Yeah. Like someone doing Bulgarians might completely hate it, and I'll say, why are they doing it? And they're like, oh, actually, I don't know. I just, either my coach programmed it or XYZ, or just I saw it online.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'd say for the general population, you can say it's sort of optional. But obviously, if you're some sort of athlete, training in athletic, I would say it's pretty mandatory to at least do it for a training block or two. So I think that's probably the best way to put it. General population, optional, can use it if you want to get a bit quicker, a bit stronger, probably useful. Yep. But again, same thing, you don't want to base your whole training around it. If you're an athlete, obviously a bit of a different story.
Look, I'd argue that resistance training just should be in every athlete's program for whatever sport. Like, even golfers are in the gym.
Yeah, I think it's good now that we're getting a real big shift in, a lot of athletes knowing just how important, muscle mass in general is and proper movement with weights.
Think about it, like even professional gamers, if that's considered a sport, are now in the gym because, cognitively it helps them. F1 drivers need to really strengthen things like their neck and stuff when they're just locked in the car and all the stuff like that with the pressure and then the speed velocity. So yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, sweet. All right, next one. Difference in heart rate zones, what it means and how it affects the body.
Gotcha. So heart rate zones, there's zones 1 to 5, and it affects the body in different ways. Think high BPM enters a different zone, and then there's also more stress and more output being done on the body. So more oxygen, more red blood cells, more accumulation. Usually it's targeted around like the ones that people know the most is zone 2, because it's popularized for zone 2 cardio is really good for like your VO2 max, specifically around training your oxygenation uptake. But then there's things like zone 4 and 5 where your heart rate's up in like the 160s to 170s to 180s, where people are like, okay, this is what's called your fat burning zone, where your body is really tapping into all stores it has to produce that energy output.
Yeah, I think it's interesting where, a lot of people probably need to start with more of that like zone 2. That I always say like to build an aerobic base first before you're going into that taxing zone 4, 5 stuff, because then you actually can't recover properly when you're doing like, say, those high intensity intervals. A lot of people, they need more rest because they can't actually complete them because they're not fit enough to. So they're not actually going to get the true benefit out of that sort of stuff, which is what you see probably at a lot of like body fits, F45s and things. It's like people coming in and they don't have an aerobic base and then they're just forced to be smashed in like zone 4, 5 all the time. And of course you adapt, you get stronger, you get better. But if these people had like, that 120, 140 BPM, had a couple of weeks at least of zone 2 with, whatever cardio you want to do, I think that would be very, very beneficial. And in terms of obviously that, like, you're fitter, you're obviously going to pump more blood around the body, right? It's going to get to your muscles quick. You're going to shuttle nutrients quicker, potentially oxidize fat a bit quicker. Like there's all these little things that add up as well. And I think it makes a big difference. So I think, like what, in terms of the difference, like what would you say if someone's looking to lose as much fat as possible, for example, what zone would you say to stay in?
Look, if they had dedicated, like we can call them fat loss sessions, like dedicated cardio sessions, I would say zone 4 or zone 5, but specifically, I would have to see the rest of their training and lifestyle and how they're recovering. Otherwise, I'd honestly program zone 2 just from the benefits that we've seen from the oxygenation uptake standpoint, building that aerobic base, but also it's really easy to recover from.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing, like going back to recovery, like zone 2 is going to be better for your recovery. You're going to get more steps in, you're going to get more movement as well and build that aerobic base. So definitely start there if you haven't started there. And then you could potentially move on to like, the more taxing zone 4, 5 stuff. But again, it does come down to recovery. So when you're trying to balance weight training with that, it is something you just have to be very conscious of, that you're not, burning yourself out and under recovering in that aspect.
Still took me 11 years to figure this out.
Of course, yeah.
Like recovery is just so underutilized. Like we don't need to be always doing more. It's the hardest thing to accept. We've all got so much going on in our life, and all the other things of like work and relationships, kids, whatever it may be, accumulates physical and mental stress on our body. More training load doesn't equal more results.
Yeah, for sure. All right, next one. We touched on it briefly, but this will be good to go into. How does the nervous system react to weight training, or how does it affect weight training?
Well, it actually affects it in multiple different ways, right? Like one thing that people don't realize is we don't just have one nervous system. Like we have a central nervous system, we have an immune system, and weight training actually affects that. You do get a form of oxidized stress when you are weight training. You're causing free radical damage and inflammation in your body, right? And then your body has to repair it. So yes, you do damage something and you repair it to get a lot stronger, because the body is very adaptogenic and it will get better. But at the same time, people don't realize it can affect things. Like if you're you say you've got the sniffles, and you do a zone 5 training session, your risk of your immune system shitting itself and you prolong that sickness for an extra week is high.
Yeah, I think going back to the nervous system in general, in terms of lifting weight, I think a lot of people don't realize that lifting weight is a skill, and your nervous system adapts to that. So you'll get to a point where, what's the easiest way to put it? Like when you first get into the gym, a lot of the early sort of strength gains you get are more like neural adaptation from just you getting better. Your nervous system gets better at moving. And then, let's say 3 to 5 weeks later, that's generally when the sort of muscle adaptations sort of come, which is why you've probably seen people in the past recommend to stay on a program for like 6, 8, 10 weeks and not trying to change a program every 2 to 3 weeks, because the problem that people have is, again, they go to the new program, they get the neural adaptations of the new exercise, but generally they're not really growing any muscle. And that's why they go in and go, oh, but I'm getting stronger every single week, but they're changing their program too often for then that muscle effect to take over. So I think that's a really interesting one. And in terms of like CNS fatigue and that, like if you're going to do like one heavy deadlift, right, like a 1 rep max where it's your actual true 1 rep max, in terms of your nervous system recovering, it's probably going to take you like 10 to 14 days. Like you won't be able to come in 7 days later and do a true 1 rep max. Not talking I could maybe do a second one. A true 1 rep max. So your nervous system does get fried, does need recovery. So I think that's really important as well when you're obviously balancing how heavy you're lifting, how many times you're training. And again, context is key in that situation.
Look, the context around like how many working sets did you do? How many warm-up sets did you do to get to those working sets? Also, when we look at nervous system and central nervous system fatigue compared to weights, how long are you resting in between your sets? And then another system, the cardiovascular system, comes into play, right? So there's multiple different systems, but training does affect your nervous system, but so does literally everything.
Yeah.
So just like everything, you need to track and manage it accordingly.
100%. And the last thing I will mention with like CNS, a lot of people have the, percentage of 1 rep max. So I like to use it with your nervous system. It's like, imagine like you got a Christmas tree full of lights, right? And these lights, as you're going up in percentage, are more and more starting to turn on, right? Once you get to probably 85%, that means they're all working, which is, you normally a 5 rep max, roughly, around 85% of your 1 rep max. And that's when you're tapping into those, real high threshold motor units and nervous system. So that's where, a lot of people are now doing like a lower volume when they're doing those sort of lower reps and they're not going some crazy high level of volume because, again, taxing on the nervous system. So it's a really good way to look at it. And obviously your body, by doing, more 5, 3, 1 rep maxes, under control and load, is going to help your nervous system adapt. And then you will get better at lifting the heavier weight as well. Yep. That is a skill in itself. That's why powerlifters do it.
And we should probably clear up a few things there because there's this myth going around on the internet that you can't do anything above 8 reps now. Like it's too fatiguing. And it's like, no, it's not. But you do have to realize like there is a certain point where, yes, you do accrue more muscle damage and muscle fatigue, and it will take some form of time extra to recover from things. It's not saying you can't do, 12 reps or anything like that, but you have to actually know how long will it take me to recover, whether it's if I did 4 to 7 reps.
Yeah, and again, like I said, it goes back to the skill, goes back to, do they know what they're doing with the exercise? Is it new? Yeah. Is it going to be neural adaptations, And like I said, with someone new to the gym, like I would much rather them do 3-4 sets at, 10 to 15 reps to learn the skill of the movement
100%.
Before they then start going down into that heavier rep range, even though it is, quote, more optimal as well.
And look, we know through literally training, like the mind-muscle connection is a big thing for a lot of people, but more so newbies. We know that, as you get more advanced, it's less relevant, but doing a high rep set for a newbie who's going to make gains regardless if they're a newbie, why not get them to feel and learn how to contract their muscles? As you said, it's a skill and it's a neural adaptation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, sweet. All right, that one's done. Glucose and insulin.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah, that's a good one. So like, just explain like basically how they work, in terms of, muscle growth or fat loss, how they contribute.
So glucose and insulin have a synergistic relationship with your liver, your pancreas. We use it. It's pretty much what sugar and carbohydrates both fall into. And a lot of people are insulin resistant. That's the big word being thrown around because, their mitochondria, which is their energy production in the system, and then also like their liver and their pancreas might not be producing enough insulin. The reason being is they're metabolically unhealthy. So when they do eat carbs or sugar, they feel like crap. But if you get someone who is very healthy and is actually efficiently using those carbs, and insulin is a precursor to growth hormone as well. That's why eating 300 grams of carbs when you're an athlete is actually amazing. That's what the body runs its fuel on. It's why you have energy. It's why you can grow muscle. It also helps send your body into a parasympathetic state, so you rest and digest. This is why sleep has a production with insulin sensitivity. And also, have you ever heard the term you grow when you sleep? That's because you do get a spike in growth hormone.
Yeah.
So yeah, I tried to answer that as simple as possible, even though it probably sounded complicated.
Could you go back to like the metabolic, flexibility or inflexibility? What makes someone not as metabolically flexible as someone else?
Yeah. If you can use carbs for fuel or not. That's literally as simple as it is. If you eat carbs and you feel really sluggish for like 20 to 30 minutes after and you feel like you need a nap, you may be insulin resistant or you maybe are just sedentary.
Yeah, cool.
There's 2 different factors there. Yeah.
And what's the easiest way to become more metabolically flexible?
Lose body fat, 1, clean up your diet, go for walks after, each of your meals, get a good night's sleep, and also hydrate.
All the magic things.
That's 5 right there, and it's like, it sounds so simple, right?
Yeah. And I think, going back to glucose, it's like, it's your body's main energy source, right? So
And the brains.
And the brains, exactly.
Yep.
So the glucose goes to your brain, it goes to your muscles, it goes everywhere, right? So, which is why we are such a big advocate, if someone, again, is metabolically healthy, to shuttle carbs in, because that's going to do, a world of good. And again, when we're talking about insulin, again, you just think like we're trying to get glucose, into the muscle cells. Being insulin not as insulin sensitive makes it more difficult to do that.
Definitely.
So that way the carbs can't basically get in and do their job is the easiest sort of way to think about it. So obviously losing body fat is going to be really big on that, and getting cardiovascularly healthy. I think are two really good things where when we get into like mitochondria and all that, that's, you know, how to get insulin in and out of the cell and get fat in and out of the cell. Again, carbs not bad, but again, we want to try and get to a place of being metabolically healthy. So then we can actually utilize them for, you know, the performance benefits and the actual positive benefits, rather than someone who's, say, 50 kilos overweight. You don't need 400 grams of carbs a day when you're training. Like, you're sweet, the energy from you burning your body fat, like that will be used during your training. And again, you know, when you're trying to get those last 5-10 kilos off, you know, that's when you can start probably, you know, being a bit more specific with your carbs. And then when you're lean, you can start really shuttling them in. And you guys might have seen one of my clients, Addy, we've sort of done this, you know, we're dropping a bit of body fat, gained a bit of muscle, done a couple of phases. And he's smashing carbs now, and he just looks like a different human. So it's awesome to see. But again, train, walk, you know, control your carb intake, and you'll be sweet there. There's going to be less glucose to be stored as body fat.
Carbs are wonderful. Like, I would argue, get metabolically healthy and get to a point where you're resistance training and eating 300 grams of carbs a day, carbs before and after your training session, and just see how you look. It's night and day difference. And also how you feel. Performance. So performance around the gym, especially if you're definitely, like, you know, lean enough, they're going to do wonders for your training, and you'll notice that big difference between, you know, potentially having carbs pre-training or just not having carbs or not having anything. So I strongly recommend for most people, you know, 50 grams of carbs, you know, a couple of hours before training, I think is a good little, you know, standard. Of course, if you're extremely dieting, different story, can move that around, but for someone who's looking to, you know, improve their performance in the gym as much as possible, gain as much muscle as possible, carbs are definitely going to be key there. 100%.
Okay, good soreness versus knowing when you've overdone it, when the muscles are too sore and not recovered.
Oh, this is a good one, because this actually falls into the question that my other client asked, but we'll get back into that because that falls under like a whole training program and soreness and things like that, right? So the difference between good soreness is the next day you can feel that your muscle has been worked. And that's the best way I can put it, like, because it's not necessarily a soreness, but you can feel it, right? You can feel that there's been some muscle damage and fatigue there and all that stuff. Bad soreness is definitely when you're too sore to actually do something or use that muscle. So if you've trained legs and it takes you 4 days to recover, and getting off the seat from sitting down on the toilet or the car seat or just in the couch hurts, that's a sign of high muscle damage, and you're also under recovered.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there with recovery at the end. Like, you know, pure joints, energy, sleep, everything's tired, and you know, you're not maximizing that. That's definitely going to be a major thing. Protein plays a part in that as well.
And carbs.
And carbs, of course. So if you, especially protein though, I find just a really big correlation to muscle soreness and that. So if you're not eating enough protein, you know, minimum I'd say 2 grams per kilo is a really good goal for most people, 1.5 to 2. We can obviously have a whole different conversation on that as well. Go back to our protein lecture. But yeah, it's one of those things where it just means recovery wasn't enough. So you may have been doing too much volume too quickly. So for example, I like to use the analogy of a runner, because a lot of people starting running lately, they'll go from not running at all to being like, I'm going to run 5K. And then a day later, they'll go, oh, now I'll run 7, now I'll run 10. And after 3 days, they're absolutely stuffed and they can't move.
Their legs don't
so you think about the load you're putting through from absolutely nothing to going into that. So it's very similar with training. It's like, you wouldn't go in your first ever session and do 16 sets of chest press, right? Or 16 sets of chest. You'd probably come in, do 2 or 3, make sure you're focusing on good quality movement, and then slowly adding a set or adding a few more reps every week, and letting your body gradually adapt to that stimulus. So you're not fragile, your body's not going to explode. Like, you'll be a bit sore from time to time, and that's completely fine. It's just, like you said, knowing the difference between actually, you know, soreness to be like, okay, I've worked that muscle, you know, that sort of dull ache, and soreness to be like, geez, I can't get off the toilet seat. My hamstrings feel like, you know, they're going to rip off the bone.
There's a difference between soreness and pain as well.
Correct.
Like, if something is actually literally painful, it could actually be like you're on the borderline of an injury, right? Like, you know, you don't really get DOMs in your neck, but if your neck's a bit sore, it's a bit like neck traps, all those things. Like, people can start to get niggles.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is a good place to leave it, guys. We're going to have part 2 coming very soon, but please, if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed and make sure you share our podcast. It helps us a lot. We're starting to get a lot more viewers over the last few weeks, which is great. We've been helping out a lot of people. Again, if you've got any more Q&A questions, send them through. We'll start doing these, probably every 10 episodes or so. But until next time, guys, we'll see you for part 2 of the podcast.
See you guys.